All right, we're doing 5.5, which is using unit rates. And first, I want to start with that whole rates thing. So going back a bunch of sections, we talked about rates and said that rates are basically a ratio. So often they're written as fractions, but the units have to be different. So it's a ratio with different units. So we started out with doing ratios like teachers to students and girls to guys and stuff like that. So for those, the units essentially are really just people. So those would all fit in ratios. But when you start getting things like miles per hour, if you're talking like a factory, the number of doors you can produce per hour, I don't know, things like that. So where the units are completely different, those are going to be rates. So if we go through and do some of these, the unit rate though is new. So I'm going to put that down in red. And a unit rate, so I think it's new. So we have to have the units that are different. That's what makes it a rate. But the unit rate then is going to be a number that's divided by 1. So for example, you could do so example maybe, switch to green, I'll say it's like 50 miles per hour. That 50 is like the unit rate because essentially what we're doing is we're saying it's 50 miles divided by 1 hour. So if you were to take a normal rate, so say you have a car that's going 100 miles, I wouldn't write this part. If you have a car that's going 100 miles in 2 hours, if you want to take and change that to 50, it's really not that bad. You just do the division. 100 divided by 2, bang, you have 50. And 50 is the same as 50 over 1, which is kind of like the unit rate. So that's what we're going to do in a couple of these examples. So starting out here with our friend Butch. Butch is a butcher, seems to kind of fit. So he makes $456 a week and he works 40 hours. So what's a unit rate for that? In his wage, so wage would be like how much he gets paid per hour. So if you go back to per means division. So in other words, we need to do the wage, the amount he makes, divided by the number of hours. So as we set up our rate, we need to have the pay on top. Maybe I'll put a $sign there. And do an H, or some people do HR for hours. I prefer H, that's what you'll do in high school. But we have $456 then, is the total amount of money he makes, and he does that in 40 hours. So if we want to take and change this to a unit rate, we do 456, punch that in a calculator, divided by 40, and we get 11.40. And since it's money, I'm going to round it to 2 decimal points like that. So $11.40, that's his dollars per hour. So that would be the unit rate. Our book takes it one step further, and they do a rate formula. So the rate formula then, what they're really saying by that is a formula is going to be something where you have a single variable equals something. They want to use this rate, this $11.40 per hour. So we could go through and we could say his pay, so maybe capital P equals, that's why it's a formula, single variable equals, and if we take this 1140, if that's dollars per hour, we could do $11.40 times H times the number of hours, and that would tell us his total pay. Because if you only worked 1 hour, it'd be 1140 times 1. If you worked 2 hours, it'd be 1140 times 2. If you worked 5 hours, 1140 times 5. Hopefully that kind of logically makes sense, that the pay per hour times the number of hours gives you how much money he is going to make. All right, I need to keep going. So if we have Butch, does Butch make more per hour than Frank, who earns $23 in 2 hours? So we could go and set it up the same way. We have the dollars per hour. So $23 divided by 2 hours. We take and plug that in. Frank then makes $11.50. I'm going to write it with 2 decimal points. You could say that's dollars per hour. And once we have that, so it's a unit rate, you could, if you wanted to, say it's 1150 over 1, but that's not really simplified. So we'll just write the 1150. And the rate formula then for him, his pay is going to be 1150 times the number of hours he works. That gives us how much money he makes. All right, so moving on then. My TV. So TV at home flashes 600 frames or 600 pictures, because a TV is really just putting these still images, but you string them together really quickly, it looks like it's smooth motion. So 600 frames or 600 pictures every second on the screen every 5 seconds. How long will it take to flash 1 million pictures? So there's 2 ways you can do this. One way is to do kind of what we've been doing. Let's figure out this unit rate. So if I want to do like frames per second, or pictures per second. So I'm going to do the frames divided by seconds, and I'll do just an S for seconds. So then I have 600 frames in 5 seconds. So if I do the division there, I'll come up with 120 frames per second. And that's just a normal HD TV, does 120 frames per second. So now if I want to do my rate formula, I could say, all right, my number of frames is going to be 120 times my number of seconds. And I'll maybe put in I guess I'll do S for seconds, tempted to do T for time, but that's going to be my rate formula. You could use this then to go through and solve and say, all right, how long is it going to take to flash 1,000,000 pictures at me? Well, I could take and put 1,000,000 in here for F, because that's the number of frames. That's going to be 120 times S. So if you wanted to figure out how many seconds, you just divide that, both sides, by 120. And when we punch that in, we'll get 8,333.3 repeating seconds. That's one way you could solve it. That's the way the books kind of preach in this section. Honestly, I wouldn't do it that way. I do this. If you go back to the last section where we were solving proportions, solving one rate or one ratio equals another, you could do the same thing. You could do frames, oops, too much of a hurry. I have kids coming in any minute for my next class. Frames divided by seconds. Your first rate would be 600 divided by 5. And then you could make that, well, 1,000,000. Well, 1,000,000 has to go on the top because that's where my frames are. Divided by x, because it's going to be x seconds. And then you could cross multiply and divide. So 600x equals 5 times 1,000,000. So then this is 5,000,000 equals 600x. Essentially you're doing the same math, you're just doing it in a slightly different order. Divide both sides by 600 and you'll get the same answer of 8,333 seconds. So either way, you could go through and do this rate formula and then use the rate formula to come up with the answer, or you could just make a proportion, cross multiply and divide. This type of problem, I like doing the proportion, cross multiply and divide. It's much easier. But make sure you can do those, like example 1 and 2. This rate formula is going to be important for other types of questions. So be able to do that too. That's all I got for you. Let me know if you have questions. See ya.